how you found your way into being like a multimedia artist, because I saw that you do like installations, video work, photography.
I really call New Orleans home. My family's been there for 200 years or so, and really pretty much every a bit of creative work I do has some connection to the culture, geography, history, genealogy, lineage, stuff like that. And certainly a lot of that really emerges from like a post-Katrina kind of landscape, which really sort of awakened me to just an awareness and importance of kind of investigating my own personal story and how my family kind of has engaged that region, like culturally and historically and stuff. So, I mean, I spent my whole childhood kind of moving through those three southern states, and I finished graduate school in Louisiana, and kind of knew that, especially right out of graduate school, that opportunities would be difficult for me to come by creatively and academically. And so, New York made good sense to me. I didn't really have any reason or purpose to go to New York, but I just kind of knew that that's where I wanted to go. And I did. And, I found my way into the International Center of Photography, which was a point of focus for my learning and exposure to just photography, film, lens-based media, and and for the last 15 years or so have been associated with the institution, both on faculty and on staff. And so, I guess the other part of the question is about like finding my way into being multimedia artist and such. I was really raised in kind of like a documentary, street photography, darkroom kind of tradition. And no doubt, when Katrina hit, it just forced me to really rethink what my purpose was as a creative individual. And, prior to that point, I was kind of using my camera to travel and go and explore other places and cultures, and then kind of use the results of that to sort of share and inform my community and, stuff like that. And when Katrina happened, it just made me recognize that I didn't really have to go any further than my own backyard to find my inspiration and to, to tell the stories that I was best suited to tell. And so, that's manifested in, a lot of like installation, sculpture, film and video, performance-based work, and then kind of like object-based photographic works as well. Use a lot of like archival ephemera, photographs, films, documents, historical records, oral histories, all that kind of stuff. And then, not really purposed as, at least originally, as artistic material. And so I kind of, part of my purpose is to elevate that kind of vernacular material and utilize it as like the core form, aesthetic, or concept for making work.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I guess I'm also interested in the piece specifically that's being shown. Watching it, I noticed that there were like 6 kind of different scenes, or I don't know if you label them gestures. Interested in knowing like the process or like thinking behind each, or just talk generally about the video.
Well, so the piece, it's loosely titled Recent Gestures. It's really little performative rituals that are actually extracted from more fully developed short form experimental video works that, and many of them kind of begin with what I call a domestic ritual. It's a process or routine that takes place in the house that is repeated and usually banal, and those gestures kind of form the basis for work that I sort of interpret and do meditations on. I mean, so it's really sort of a montage of elements that exist in other works that are, kind of more like cinema based, things that screen in film festivals and like darkened spaces where you sit down and watch it from beginning to end. Action of those pieces. Some unusual things. I mean, the one that comes to mind as a core element is me kneeling on the heating grate of that's like a heating furnace, which is sort of a typical architectural feature in old New Orleans houses. And there was a story that my grandfather used to punish my mom and her siblings by making them kneel on the heating grate, nose to nose. It's the most Catholic of punishments.
Wow.
That I found one of those heating grates. It looked exactly like my grandmother's did, which we used to be pretty terrified of as a kid. My grandma also told us that like the devil lived under it and stuff like that. So there's all kind of like very strange and somewhat terrifying things that were passed on. But that gesture is something that I interpreted just into like a metaphor for like self-worth and validation and kind of just contemporary roles in continuing intergenerational communication, and whether one's really ready to kind of take on that mantle and to pass it on appropriately.
Interested in the scene with just like the on the road? Like, were you traveling somewhere, or
that is one of three main ways to get out of New Orleans.
Okay.
And so I shot video of basically that exodus, which was part of a video called Flee. That was more installation based. I did it with a guy I collaborate with for 20 years. And we had these kind of dual opposing screens in a gallery space. And we're cycling back and forth with just some gestures related to our family histories and some of the things that have informed that. So yeah, that was basically like a suggestion of like evacuating home.
Yeah. One of the questions that we asked one of the other artists is, what is like the relevance of your work to a college campus? What the relevance of your work may be to North Carolina, just being in the South?
I mean, I have been fortunate enough to collaborate quite a bit on university campuses and colleges through like kind of short visiting artist residencies and stuff like that. And I'm also a teacher myself. I try to impart academically that you should make art about what you know, and for me, what you know is kind of far-reaching, very individualized, and is essential, I think, as a student or as an artist to really tap into your experience, because certainly what you can speak of more effectively and more clearly and more purposefully than someone who's on the outside looking in. And so that's something that I really focus on really in kind of every level of my teaching and in my practice. I mean, as far as the South is concerned, after being in New York for 16 years, I consider myself probably more of a Southerner now than I ever did when I lived in the South. Maybe there's a little bit of the grass is greener effect going, but when I moved to New York, I was apprehensive. I was unsure of whether I belonged or could kind of hang with, folks who spent $250,000 on their education and stuff, when I went to like, big state schools and didn't pay hardly any money. And it's also like about telling stories that are from my geography. And I think sometimes, a lot of folks who I've come across from the South and from like smaller and more rural places don't necessarily feel it's appropriate to like exercise those connections or to really like to find power in the places that they come from. And for me, that's something that it's a shame and like a huge oversight, and something that I like to sort of redefine for people, because I don't teach so many people from the South now, but if I have somebody from upstate New York or out in New Jersey, I'm telling like, you should make work about those kind of places rather than Midtown Manhattan, because Midtown Manhattan is boring. Like
Yeah.
somewhere out in upstate New York that no one's really looking at or thinking about like creatively, there's fertile ground to be mined there.
Finally, just like, what questions do you want to be asked about your work when people are viewing it?
I mean, maybe less than questions I would hope to be asked. It it would, like, I'd be more concerned about people maybe finding some of themselves inside of the work. And I think it's a lot of it relates to being attentive to fading family histories, tapping into your elders and your ancestors, and making sure that we do a good job of preserving those cultural legacies, no matter how quiet or insignificant they may seem on the surface. Because when you lose your grandparents or your parents, like, that bit of history is gone. And it's something that I've found a lot of value and worth in. And I hope when folks look at my work that they may sort of reflect that back on themselves, and maybe kind of reanimate their own connections with their ancestors and their loved ones, and kind of just recognize and preserve whatever family histories they have in front of them.